relationships. But I was actually on my third marriage, and I knew that I was going to get a divorce. And I thought, I have to do something to support these little babies, because at the time, I think I was working retail, and I decided to go to nursing school, and I did, and I completed and became a registered nurse, and I loved it. Thank you. But one day, while I was a nurse, I had a headache, and years ago, it's not like it is today. I like to tell people that it is like it is today because of me, but that's my ego talking. I think it's like it is today because everything is computerized. But back then, literally, there were pill jugs of Vicodin and other pills sitting in jugs at the nurse's station. And somebody suggested that I take a pill for my headache. And I had never felt as good as I felt after taking that pill. I had the answer to all my prayers. I had this huge sense of euphoria. I had more energy. I had more confidence. I went home. I bathed the kids. I did laundry. I felt like I had never felt before, and I had to have more of what was in that little pill. So my addiction spiraled pretty quickly. Before I knew it, I was stealing morphine and injecting it. As you can imagine, I lost my job, and I turned to heroin. And I'm ashamed to say, I have a lot of guilt and shame still to this day, but my drug became the most important thing to me. It was more important than my kids, more important than anything.
Bless the Lord.
Yes, bless her.
Bless you. Bless you.
My father eventually did get sober, and my kids never seen him, they never seen him drunk. And when my mom, who was still alive at the time, she then became my chief enabler. She was diagnosed with cancer, and she gave me 3 Vicodins a day because in her mind that would keep me off of the street, but it didn't. I would take those 3 Vicodin, wait till she passed out or went to sleep, and then I would steal more of her drugs, and then I would still go out and buy more of my drugs myself. Wow. At the end of my addiction, my kids were no longer speaking to me, and I was sleeping with strangers for one more hit. It's just the reality of it. It was survival. I had become my father only 10 times worse. Now I went to treatment centers, and I did have some periods of sobriety. I would stay clean 6 months here, a year here, but I never really, I don't know, I didn't do anything that was ever, suggested. They suggest that you get a sponsor. They suggest that you go to meetings. I never did anything they suggested. I kind of just white-knuckled it, and every time I went back to the drugs. Like I say, at the end of my addiction, I had lost, I'm going to tell you another little story about my mom. So my brother and sister, they knew I was stealing from my mom, and they changed the locks on her front door. And my mom called me and said, Beverly, there's something for you under the lawn chair on the front porch, but if you tell your brother and sister, I'll have to kill you. Well, it was the key to the new lock. It's like she just couldn't help herself. And I miss her terribly, and I wish that she could see me clean and see how good I'm doing. But I know she can, because I know she's in heaven.
Amen.
Yes, amen.
Thank you. But when I had periods of sobriety, I went to this little clubhouse, an AA, Alcoholics Anonymous clubhouse, in Middletown, Ohio, called Traditions Clubhouse. And it was named that for the 12 traditions of AA. And I had a friend, and I called him one day. And now, my life, I was living out of my car. My kids were no longer speaking to me. my mom and dad were both gone, I prayed to God every day that he would just let me go to sleep and not wake up. And I was so angry with him that every morning I woke up and I had to get more drugs, because at this point, if I didn't get high, I got sick. And I couldn't stand that sickness. But I had a friend at Traditions Clubhouse, and he said there's a little treatment center in Falmouth, Kentucky. It's a care unit. It is no longer there. But if you go there, I can get you a bed. I know somebody in the administration. So I drove my little car down there, and I got there at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they said the bed wouldn't be available till 9 p.m. that night. Did I want to wait for it? And this is one of my God shots, but I knew if I walked out of that waiting room, I was going to die. So I said, yes, can I sit here and wait for the bed? And they said yes. And that's what I did. And I got the bed. And I went to every group, and every Wednesday and Sunday we had a pastor, not a little pastor. I call him a pastor, and a little guy that played the guitar, and they came in and they did a little church service for us drug addicts every Wednesday and every Sunday. Now, I don't know if you guys know much about the recovery field, but today we are blessed. This is Overdose Awareness Month. That's why I'm wearing a purple ribbon. But the recovery community is blessed today. We are saturated with sober living homes. Well, back then, we weren't saturated with sober living homes. There was one, and it was in Covington, Kentucky. Now, I lived in Ohio, so this was a couple hours from where I lived, but I had to get a bed in that facility. And every Wednesday and Sunday, the pastor would come in and say, does anybody have any prayer requests? And I would go up and I would say, I've got to get a bed in this facility. Another thing that blesses our community today is drug addicts can get into these facilities free. Back then, I had to have $385 to get into this facility. I didn't have a dollar in my name. And I called my sister and I said, I need $385 to get into this facility. And she said, I'll give you half, but you've always been a pretty self-sufficient old gal. You can probably figure out how to get the rest. Well, I don't know. Call this another God shot. I didn't know how I was going to get that money. It was like $192.50, but I knew God wanted me in that bed.
Amen. Yes.
So every Wednesday and Sunday, I went up and I got to get this bed in this sober living facility. And now I didn't have any friends. My family didn't come and visit me. And it was the night before I was getting discharged. And I was starting to get a little nervous. I was thinking, well, I was working out in my head. I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell them, give me a week. I'll get you the other half of the money. I'll do something. And they came over the loudspeaker and they said, Bev, you have a visitor in the day room. Well, I didn't have no visitors. So, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. So, they said, Bev, you have a visitor in the day room. So I went out there, and it was the pastor of this church and his wife. And he said, Beverly, my wife and I want to give you the other half of the money to get into that sober living. I believe in you. It had been a very long time since anybody had ever said anything positive to me, like that they believed in me and seen something good in me. And I said to him, you never give a drug addict money. And he said, I'm giving this drug addict money because you're going to take it there and you're going to do the right thing. And there was no way I was going to let him down. So that's exactly what I did. And I got that sober. And I lived there for 18 months. And I started reaching out to my daughter, tried to reach out to my son. He was very angry. He wouldn't accept my phone calls, but my daughter was a little more forgiving, and she would take my phone calls, and she would even let me see her kids a couple times. And I would say things like, have you talked to your brother? Have you told your brother how good I'm doing? And she said, Mom, he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. And I just said, okay, that's fine, okay. But at the end of my 18 months, now I told you I've been married and divorced 5 times. But at this point in my life, I had been married 5 times, divorced 4 times. So I still had my future ex-husband. And he said, Bev, come back to Middletown. You're not getting high. We can make it work. I know we can do this. So I said, okay. So I moved back to Middletown, and I think I lived with him for about a week. And I called my daughter, and I said, if I don't move out, I'm either going to kill him or I'm going to get high. And my daughter said, please don't get high, Mom. They'd rather see me go to jail for murder than get high. Okay. So anyways, my daughter and I went out, and we found this little ghetto apartment in Middletown, and I loved it. It was mine. And, I was doing the deal. I was going to meetings. I had a sponsor. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I was talking to my daughter as much as I possibly could. And, I was still saying, have you talked to your brother? Have you told him how good I'm doing? No, Mom. I mean, I've told him, but he said just as good for you. So, said, okay. So I'm at a meeting one night at Traditions Clubhouse, and every time anybody new comes into a meeting, everybody turns around, and we always try to pick what we thought their drug was, and create a backstory for it, so to speak. So one of my friends said, that's a tall, good-looking drink of water, and I turned around and I said, that's not a drink of water, that's my baby. So it was JD, and I said, what are you doing here? And now, I did have periods of sobriety where I took the kids to meetings, and they loved meetings. That both my kids loved 12-step meetings. And JD said, well, I hadn't taken in a meeting in a long time, and we kind of chuckled. And he said, after the meeting, I got to talk to you about something important. I said, okay. So we enjoyed the meeting, and then afterwards, we went out and sat in the car, and he said, Mom, I wrote a book, and you're not very favorable in the book, but I got to be honest with you, I thought you'd be dead. But Lindsay tells me that you're doing real good. And if you don't want me to have that book published, I won't. Wow. And I said, no. My exact words were, publish the effing book, but I'm in church. I'm in a church crowd, so I'll say effing. Thank you. That's true. So anyways, the book got published, and I don't know if you've read Hillbilly Elegy, but there's a line in the book. There's a line in the book that says, my mother, a woman I wished I'd never met. It's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. But I did ask him, will the book help you heal? And he said, I think it will. And that's when I said, publish the effing book. So anyways, the book gets published, and I'm at work, and I get a call from my daughter, and she says, JD's book just made it to the bestseller list, and he's flying all of us out to New York for a big party. And I said, is he flying me? No, Mom, he doesn't want you there. And for the first time, I thought, why am I doing all this? Why am I doing all this if I'm not going to have my kids back the way I want them? But I called my sponsor, and my sponsor said, this may be as good as it gets. Are you going to throw away all your hard work to go to a party in New York where you know there's going to be drinking and you don't even drink anyways? And I said, no, I'm not. But that was hard. That crushed me. So, I'm still going on now. I'm no longer a registered nurse for the state of Ohio. I have lost my license. I'm also at a meeting, and a girl who is a nurse who is getting high, and I tell her, you will mess up your whole life. You think they don't know, but they do, and you shouldn't be taking care of people inebriated. And it's like, I thought, wow, how grown up of me. And she said, oh, if you're so great, why aren't you a nurse? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to call them. So I called them, and they agreed to meet with me. And they said, now I think I was working at a gas station, and I was living in my ghetto apartment. And they said, what we'll do is we're going to put you on a 1-year legitimate suspension. But during that year, you have to submit to urine drug screens at your cost. You have to take continuing education units for every year you haven't been a nurse at your cost. So they're like, all I could hear was at your cost, at your cost. So finally I asked, about how much is this going to cost me? And they said, you should probably have about $6,000. And if at any time you have to stop because you don't have the money, you will be disqualified from the alternative program for addicted nurses. Well, I didn't have any money. So I thought, this is never going to happen. But God, this is a God shot. I get home, I get a phone call from my son, and he said, Mom, Ron Howard wants to turn the book into a movie, and you're going to get paid. That's another God shot. Well, now hold your applause for this, please. Because I then get a call from Ron Howard, and Ron Howard says, Beverly, we're going to pay you $12,000. And I said, you're going to pay me $12,000 to tell the whole world I'm a drug addict whore? I don't think so. Click. So then I get a call from my son who says, Mom, please tell me you didn't just hang up on Ron Howard. And I said, do you know what they wanted to pay me? And he said, no. And I told him, and he said, my drug addict mom would have taken that money and ran. My recovery mom fights for what she knows is right. At the time, his wife was pregnant, and he said, when Usha goes into labor, do you want to come up and watch your grandson be born? They were living in Columbus, and I said, of course I do. So a couple months later, he calls, and he says, Usha's in labor, come on up. So I drive to Columbus. My daughter's up there. Usha's parents are there. I mean, we're all there. And JD comes out, and he says, well, he's not coming tonight. So everybody go get a motel room, and I'll call you if it happens. And I was gathering up my stuff. I was going to go get a motel room. And he said, not you, Mom. Will you go to the house and make sure it's straightened so Usha and the baby come home to a clean house, and will you let the dogs out? That's what you ask your mom to do. And I had never even looked at the house. And I said, of course I will. So I didn't get any sleep. I cleaned that house top to bottom, walked the dogs, fed the dogs, and I'm crying all night, oh my God, this is what you ask your mom to do. He asked me, and I'm his mom, and this is, and it was amazing. And the next morning, now, this is another God shot, and I don't know, this is what I think. But JD's first son, Vance, was born, and my fourth grandchild, and he said, Mom, do you want to hold your grandson? Now, I don't know if this happened, but this is what happened in my mind. He looked at that baby and knew that no matter what, he would do anything for that little boy for the rest of his life. Yeah. And then he looked at me and he realized that no matter what, I would do anything for him. I just had a disease. I had the disease of addiction.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't know, but after that moment, it's like he started calling. We like, you know, and then, you know, we got this, there was this big joke, like I was gonna get millions from the movie. I did not, let me just point that out. But JD said, Mom, what are you gonna do with all your movie money? And I said, I'm gonna buy a house. Ooh, that's such a great idea. You're thinking fiscally, and I don't know how lawyers talk, but that's what it sounded like to me. And him and my daughter became obsessed with finding me a place to live. And I found this little place. It was a little ranch on an acre of land, and I told them about it, and they go, oh, Mom, you're not getting any younger. Who's going to cut your grass? And all this, and it's like, you need a condo. It's like, I don't want a condo. A condo is like an apartment. And so my daughter calls me about a week later and says, Mom, I found this condo. You gotta come look at it. It's like, oh my God, okay.
Don't want
and
a
it had
condo.
one of those realtor locks on it, and she knew the code, and I said, if the police get called, you're going to jail, girl, because I'm completely legal today. And we were walking around, and the condo was beautiful. It really was beautiful. And I'm like, oh, if I had it, well, she started it. She was like, where would you put your couch? Where would you do this? Where would you? And I'm playing along, you know, with her. Then there was a knock on the door, and I made a joke, and I said, that's the cops. You're going down, girl. I'm selling you out. We opened the door, and it was JD. And JD looked at Lindsay, and Lindsay looked at JD, and Lindsay said she loves it. And he held up the keys, and he said, I bought it for you. I went for about 4 years and didn't speak to him, to now he's telling me to save my money, and he bought me a condo that I still live in today. So I'm a little lonely, and I'm thinking, you know, I've been single a long time, and I tell my kids, I think I'm going to get on one of those dating apps. And they're like, oh, Mom, no, get a dog. So I got a dog. So my daughter and I went to this rescue in Kentucky, and you know, I seen all the dogs were lovely. I would have taken any one of them home, but I looked through this glass door. It was about this big, and they had this old dog in there, and she was pretty rough looking. And I said, what's wrong with that dog? And they said, well, she's scheduled to be euthanized. And I said, can I pet her? And they said, yeah, but you'll have to sign something saying if she bites you, you won't hold us responsible. And that's the dog I adopted. We bonded instantly. She's my girl. I'm an old lady. She was an old lady. And I was just telling Justin today, she can no longer climb up into the bed, so now I sleep on my living room floor. Because we've slept together for the last 5 years. We're not stopping now. So, you know, I did my year's suspension with the nursing board, and I knew that when I went back to work, I wanted to work in substance use. I wanted to work with people like me. And so I got a job at a substance use facility, and I had a few restrictions on my license, but I met with the Ohio Board of Nursing, and I said, look, I will do anything you want, but I want my license free and clear. And as of July 24, 2025, I have my Ohio Board of, I have a compact license now. I told you I get kind of off track if I don't use my cards, but so let's see here. December 29th, 2025. I don't know if we have any medical people in the audience, okay? But I had what's known as a Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It is a heart attack, but it's not a heart attack due to blockage. It's a heart attack due to, I had a hiatal hernia that had penetrated my diaphragm, which is this muscle right here, and was sitting on my heart, and basically caused cardiac damage. This is December 29th. I had an inauguration to get to on January 20th. And I told the doctors, I don't care if you release me or not, I'm gonna be on that plane. I'm going to Washington, D.C. So they did release me to fly January 13th, but I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm still not feeling 100%. But I get a call from one of JD's staffers, you have to be up at such and such a time, you're gonna be in the motorcade. And I said, why? And they said, JD wants you on stage. And I said, are you sure he wants me? And she said, does he call anybody else mom? And I went, I don't think so. And she said, no, he was very specific. He wants Usha, the 3 kids, and mom to form a semicircle around him. Aww. And I was there, and I don't know if you guys saw all the social media about the poor woman in the red sweater, and everybody else was dressed by designers. I was dressed by Kohl's in Middletown. And that was a very fine sweater. And I had house shoes on because my feet and ankles were still so swollen up that I couldn't even get shoes on my feet at the time. But I tell my daughter, Lindsay, so a couple of years ago I get a call from my daughter, and she says, Mom, Kevin and I are having some issues, can I move in? That's what you ask your mom. You ask your mom if you can stay with your mom. I said, heck yeah. Then she said, can I bring my dog? And I said, well, I don't know if your dog will get along with my dog. And then she started crying, and I said, bring the dog, come on, I don't care. So anyways, they have since reconciled, and she's out of my house, so praise God. And I love my son-in-law very much. He's the one that took me to the hospital when I was so sick. And I tell my daughter, I said, you know, when I speak to people, I end my story with, oh, I'm so blessed, and life is so good. And I said, I don't like that ending. And my daughter said, Mom, you're just getting started. Yeah. So my name is Beverly Vance, and I'm just getting started.